Is game over a failure of game design? Noted man who cried in a Canadian courtroom for being criticized for posting Nazi swastikas in his office and pictures of women's breasts on the walls of his office bathroom, David Cage, once said that game overs are a failure of game design. Or, that is how people remember it. What he actually said was, quote, "I've always felt that game over is a state of failure more for the game designer than from the player." End quote. He said that back in 2012, before Quantic Dream's game Beyond Two Souls came out. Legal controversies would begin to follow Monsieur Cage soon after in the coming months. Now, my personal opinion of David Cage is that he is a racist, a sexist, and a stunted child in an adult's body who was raised to fame solely because he had access to enough money to get David Bowie to voice a character in Omicron the Nomad Soul. But his story-driven games are successful in spite of his input, rather than because of it. He is a politics-baiting coward who would draw heavily from the American civil rights movement for his game Detroit Become Human, and then went through dozens of interviews saying that his game was not about race. One need only look to the Star Wars Quantic Dream reveal at the Game Awards 2021 to know how the gaming culture truly feels about David Cage's stories. With all that said, I am also the kind of person who will write a whole article on what Clint Hawking actually meant by the term ludonarrative dissonance, even though, as a term, I disagree with it being an inherent problem in game design. So, I am happy to, with goodwill and honesty, explore this idea too. The rest of the David Cage quote reads, "It's like creating an artificial loop, saying you didn't play the game the way I wanted you to play, so now you're punished and you're going to come back and play it again until you do what I want you to do." In an action game, I can get that. Why not? It's all about skills. But in a story-driven experience, it doesn't make any sense. End quote. What he is essentially saying is that good narrative games don't make players start over to make the right choice, but rather every choice a player could make should result in its own consequence that continues the story and results in a unique ending. In other words, he is talking about contingency. He is saying that players will feel better about their choices having weight and value, that their choices are made freely and have consequence if you, the player, have the sense that they could have done otherwise. See my video, Freedom is Contingent, for more on this idea. He completely separates narrative structure from a player's actions in other aspects of gameplay, and thus leaving behind the potential to see actions as narrative choices in game design. And honestly, this isn't a very remarkable or audacious statement. It is, and was, basic discourse about the nature of game stories of the time. Infamous, Mass Effect, KOTOR, and tons of other action games achieved this idea by having the good guy blue choice and the bad babe red choice guide stories along largely simplistic and inconsistent ethical dichotomies. Visual novels and other narrative-driven games also follow this logic, letting players make bad decisions and continue playing the game, eventually leading to a bad end. I remember once when playing BlazBlue story mode, I made a choice that led to a 2-hour-long apocryphal joke scenario without a single opportunity to fight that ended in a game over. Or one of my most hated games, R. Tonelico Koga Nell of RCL, which will set you on a multi-hour path to a bad end if you fail to defeat a certain boss within a certain time. And yet, this isn't actually gospel. when it comes to narrative design in games. The graphic adventure games of Sierra, or the mystery visual novel of Ace Attorney Phoenix Wright, use making wrong choices and bad inferences as opportunities to create humorous, slapstick, and ironic comedy. There is a right choice or solution for these stories, and yet contingency is used not to expand or divert the narrative, but to create a meta-narrative of wanting to be entertained by witnessing extraordinary failures of moon logic. That didn't really start changing until Monkey Island came onto the PC gamer scene, one of the first graphic adventures to let players fail forward. More on that in my previous video on Monkey Island. What is humorously the most inaccurate thing about David Cage's statement is that the stories of action games of that time were already doing exactly that in an action game context. Dark Souls had plenty of decisions a person could make along the terms of the narrative, but not one of them would result in a game over. A kick to the menu, a start again. Rather, they would just continue forward unto one of the endings that was available to them based on those choices. Skyrim let players make many decisions along certain quest lines that would lock out other options. Contingency on full display with the Civil War quest, and such would impact how a player progressed through the main quest without impacting whether or not the player could complete the main quest. I think, in the end, the fatal flaw of this statement was confusing that actions and choices in the context of a game are fundamentally different things. He held narrative and skill-based agonism as diametrically separate and designed narrative games within that belief. But he did so in a time when people were far more concerned with finding ways to bridge that gap than on making things that kept the concepts distinct. Luckily, YouTube was rising to popularity, and lower skill, high entertainment productions would elevate Quantic Dream right alongside Telltale Games as narrative gaming events that the culture would center around like a big global water cooler. Stay true.